wake up and before your feet even touch the floor, your mind is already racing. Deadlines, goals, emails. The subtle hum of urgency starts pulsing beneath your skin. It's not panic exactly. It's something more familiar, almost invisible, a quiet pressure to do. You check your phone, notifications buzz like flies. You sit down with your coffee, not to enjoy it, but to power up. Your to-do list stretches longer than your energy. Still, you keep going, keep moving, keep producing, because stopping feels worse. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack discipline, but because somewhere deep inside a voice has been trained to whisper, your worth depends on how much you accomplish. You've learned to wear exhaustion like a badge of honor, to mistake burnout for dedication. You call it being responsible, you call it hustle, you call it being driven, but beneath the surface, something darker is unfolding. A slow erosion, a disconnection from stillness, a gradual disappearance of your inner world. Because when productivity becomes the measure of your value, who you are is replaced by what you do, and what you do is never enough. No matter how many boxes you check, no matter how many late nights you push through, no matter how many goals you hit, metrics you meet, hours you grind, that haunting question always returns, have I done enough? But here's the truth no one tells you. Productivity has a shadow. It looks admirable, focused, controlled. But in that shadow hides the fear of being still, of being unworthy, of being forgotten if you stop moving. Modern culture celebrates the hyper-productive, the early risers, the no excuses mindset, the constant optimization of every minute. Even your rest must now be productive. Meditation, only if it improves your focus. A walk, great if you listen to a podcast. A vacation, sure, just answer a few emails first. We've been sold a religion of output, but no one warns us of its side effects. The soul-deep fatigue, the loss of self, the quiet panic that erupts in moments of stillness. And worst of all, we begin to conflate identity with achievement. We become human doings, not human beings. So let's pause here and ask, what are you really afraid of when you're not productive? What happens when you sit with the emptiness between tasks? Who are you without your calendar, your KPIs, your inbox? And most importantly, what if your constant productivity is not a sign of strength, but a symptom of something else, something unresolved, something buried, something you've been too busy to feel? Because here's the secret. You can be incredibly productive and still be deeply disconnected. You can succeed outwardly while slowly vanishing inwardly. You can meet every goal and lose yourself in the process. So the question becomes, what's the real cost of a life built on constant doing if you forget how to be? At first glance, productivity looks like discipline, like responsibility, like power. But under the surface, much of our obsessive drive to be productive isn't rooted in freedom, it's rooted in fear. Fear of stillness, fear of judgment, fear of being worthless if we're not constantly proving our value. And that fear is deeply conditioned from a young age. Most of us were taught that our value comes from what we do, not who we are. We were praised when we performed, rewarded when we obeyed, loved when we achieved. The child who sat still got approval. The child who colored inside the lines was good. The child who accomplished, who earned the gold star, the high grade, the parental smile, was the child who mattered. So we learned stillness equals laziness, play equals wasted time, rest equals guilt. And this lesson followed us into adulthood, where the stakes only got higher. Now, the gold stars are replaced with promotions. The parental praise becomes social validation, and the sense of self-worth becomes entangled with how productive we appear to others. Even worse, how productive we appear to ourselves. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. But what happens when your persona becomes efficiency itself? When your identity fuses so tightly with performance that you forget who you are without it. You become exhausted, numb, emotionally distant, but most dangerously, you don't even notice. Because you're still checking boxes, still winning, still getting it done. But inside, something is eroding. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han describes modern burnout as the collapse of a self that is forced to become its own taskmaster. He writes, "Today's individual is an entrepreneur of the self. He exploits himself and believes he is achieving fulfillment." This is the paradox of our time. You think you're free because no one is forcing you to work yourself to death. But the whip is in your own hand. You become the enforcer, the manager, the brand. You push yourself not because someone else demands it, but because you've internalized the demand. And what's worse, you're celebrated for it. The world doesn't warn you when you're over-identifying with productivity. It claps. It promotes you. It reposts your hustle. It tells you, look how motivated you are. But beneath that praise, a deeper truth waits. Quiet, unspoken, and haunting. You're not building a life. You're performing one. So ask yourself, who taught you that being productive made you more lovable? When did doing become more important than being? What part of you is afraid of stopping? Because the truth is, many of us use productivity as anesthesia. We overschedule to avoid silence. We overwork to drown out discomfort. We overperfunct to escape the harder questions. Am I actually living a life I want, or just the one that looks impressive? Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote that existence precedes essence, that we are not born with meaning, we must choose and create it. But here's the trap. When you're too busy producing to reflect, you never ask what your essence even is. You never discover what you truly value, want, or believe because you're too busy trying to prove something to someone, and often you don't even know who that someone is. Is it your boss, your parents, a younger version of you who still believes love must be earned? Who are you trying to impress? Because the need to be productive rarely comes from clarity, it comes from a fear of being nothing at all. And when your identity is built on achievement, you become terrified of failure, not because of the outcome, but because it threatens the fragile structure of your self-worth. Arthur Schopenhauer said that most suffering comes not from pain, but from desire. And what if the desire to be productive, to be excellent, to be efficient is itself a form of suffering? Because it never ends. You reach one milestone and there's another. You complete one task and you feel behind again. You rest for a day and guilt creeps in like a shadow. The inner critic is relentless. You could be doing more. You're falling behind. You haven't earned rest. And that voice isn't yours. It's inherited, conditioned, a ghost of the expectations you never question. This is the root of the problem. You were not taught to trust your being. You were taught to worship your doing. And that is why no amount of productivity will ever be enough, because it's not solving the real issue, it's avoiding it. So now we arrive at the deeper truth. You're not tired from working too hard, you're tired from running from yourself. And the more you run, the more you lose sight of what you're actually running toward. That's when the cracks begin to show. In your relationships, in your energy, in your soul. And that leads us to the next chapter, not just what this obsession with productivity does to your mind, but what it does to your life. It doesn't happen all at once. The collapse begins in quiet ways. You miss one sunset because you're answering emails. You cancel a gathering with friends because you're too behind. You delay rest. Just one more task, one more goal, one more checkbox. At first it feels small, reasonable, responsible. But then it becomes your norm. You forget the last time you read for pleasure. You forget the last time you created something just for the joy of it. You forget the last time you sat in stillness and didn't feel restless. You've become so good at being productive that you've become a stranger to your own soul. And here's the tragic irony. The more productive you are, the less alive you feel. Not because you're broken, but because you're slowly becoming a machine, a human optimized for output, efficient, obedient, focused, but emotionally hollow. Your nervous system is stuck in survival mode, constantly activated, unable to rest. You lie in bed and your mind doesn't shut off. You take time off and feel guilty for not filling it with purpose. Even joy becomes a task. And yet, on the outside, you look like you're thriving. You're getting things done, you're on top of it, you're productive, but inside, you're empty. Because a life without presence is not a life. It's a performance. You've replaced meaning with metrics, presence with planning, authenticity with achievement. And no one notices because this kind of collapse is socially rewarded. Our culture doesn't call it dysfunction, it calls it ambition. It applauds the burnout, it glorifies the grind. It says, look how hard you're working. But what if working harder is just another way of avoiding what hurts? What if your constant striving is a way to run from the stillness where your real questions live? Questions like, is this life mine? What am I actually building? Who am I without the hustle? Because when the doing never stops, the being disappears, and eventually, so do you. You become present in body, absent in soul. You smile in meetings, you reply to messages, you keep up appearances. But somewhere inside, a voice gets quieter. A part of you starts to fade. And that fading comes with a cost. You begin to lose your intuition because you're too busy to hear it. You lose your creativity because there's no space to wander. You lose your desire because your schedule is too full to feel longing. You lose your joy because you don't even notice when it slips away. And then come the symptoms: fatigue that rest doesn't fix, anxiety that productivity can't silence, numbness that achievement doesn't heal, a haunting sense that something is missing, but you can't name it. This is what happens when the soul is overruled by the schedule. And yet many don't even realize it because we've normalized self-erasure. We praise the person who never stops. We envy the one who's always grinding. We call them strong, successful, unstoppable. But what if they're not thriving? What if they're just too exhausted to remember who they were before the chase began? You see, disconnection doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like high-functioning emptiness. You're doing everything right, and yet your inner world feels silent, colorless, mechanical. Because the cost of constant productivity is subtle but profound. You stop being human, you become a role, a function, a walking to-do list. And worst of all, you lose the ability to rest without guilt, because somewhere along the way, rest became weakness. But here's the truth. Rest is not a reward. It's a right. Joy is not a distraction. It's your compass. Slowness is not laziness. It's where your truth returns. And yet, every time you choose presence over performance, the voice in your head panics. You're falling behind. You're wasting time. You haven't earned this. But who decided what you have to earn? And what are you so afraid will happen if you simply stop? If you stopped measuring your worth in productivity, if you stopped defining your day by output, if you stopped equating busyness with value, what would remain? Maybe at first just silence, but eventually something else. Maybe presence, maybe clarity, maybe truth. Because the things that matter most can't be measured in hours or checklists. They live in the spaces between, in the unplanned conversation, the spontaneous pause, the forgotten laugh, the slow walk with no destination. You can't schedule those things. You can only choose to make space for them. And until you do, you will keep mistaking exhaustion for success. So now the question becomes, are you building a life or building a brand? Because one feeds the soul and the other feeds the algorithm. It's time to stop running, stop measuring, stop trying to earn your existence. You don't need to do more. You need to return to the parts of you that never wanted this pace to begin with. But how? How do you rebel against a world that won't let you stop moving? That's where we go next. There is a quiet kind of rebellion. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic change. It begins with something far more dangerous in a hyper-productive world. Stillness, to pause, to not respond immediately, to take a walk without headphones, to sit in the silence that scares you, to ask yourself, without distraction, what am I really doing this for? That question is a crack in the machine, because once you ask it and dare to answer honestly, you begin to see what the world taught you to ignore. That you've been living by rules you never agreed to, pushing toward goals you don't remember choosing, measuring your worth with numbers that mean nothing to your soul. And you start to wonder, what if this isn't power? What if it's performance? What if my discipline is just well-packaged fear? This is where the rebellion begins, not with more effort, but with a radical shift in value from achievement to alignment, from efficiency to essence. Let's be clear, this is not about abandoning responsibility. This is about reclaiming authenticity, because a life lived in constant motion can look impressive, but that doesn't mean it's real. Carl Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart." But how can you look inward when you never stop moving? To break free from the shadow of productivity, you have to stop believing the lies it's built on. That your worth is measured in output, that rest must be earned, that slowness is failure, that joy must be justified, that presence is inefficient. And most of all, that to be enough, you must constantly prove something. No, you were enough before you accomplished anything. You are enough even when you rest. But reclaiming this truth takes unlearning. It takes letting go of the internal taskmaster, the voice that tells you, do more, be more, prove yourself. Here are 3 ways to begin the rebellion. 1, create sacred pauses, not breaks. Not productivity hacks disguised as self-care. Real pauses. Sit in silence. Breathe without fixing. Walk without consuming. Let yourself feel the discomfort that rises when you're not doing anything. That discomfort? It's the sound of your soul reawakening. 2, redefine what success means. Ask yourself, what does a successful day feel like, not just look like? When do I feel most myself, most aligned, most whole? Now compare that to what your calendar reflects. If the 2 don't match, you're not failing, you're living out of alignment. Burn the blueprint that was handed to you. Build a new one from the inside out. 3, practice doing less with more presence, not as a retreat, but as an act of power. Because being present in one real moment is worth more than rushing through 10 shallow ones. Choose quality over quantity, meaning over motion, depth over speed. This isn't easy. You'll be tempted to go back, to fill the silence, to redemand the task app, to measure your worth by your busyness. But every time you choose presence, you rewire something. You teach your nervous system that safety doesn't come from speed, it comes from truth. And slowly, you remember, you're not here to perform life. You're here to live it. You're not here to impress the world. You're here to meet yourself. You're not here to chase worth. You're here to embody it. Let them say you're lazy. Let them call you slow. Let them misunderstand your rebellion. Because what you're choosing isn't visible to them, but it's real. You're choosing to no longer abandon yourself, to no longer betray your peace, to no longer sacrifice your soul at the altar of productivity. That's not weakness, that's clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Because once you taste it, you can't unsee it. You'll begin to recognize the ones still caught in the loop. You'll feel the sadness in their busyness. You'll see the exhaustion behind their smile. And maybe, just maybe, you'll become the permission they didn't know they needed. Because the rebellion is contagious. All it takes is one person, calm, present, rooted, to remind the rest of us there is another way to live. So here we are. You've seen the mask for what it is. You've felt the ache beneath the motion. You've touched the truth behind the tasks. Now comes the hardest part. Not running, not resisting, but remembering, because the truth is simple, so simple it almost feels unbearable. You were never meant to live like this. You weren't meant to wake up every day with a weight on your chest, to measure your worth in inboxes cleared and milestones met, to live in a constant loop of doing, proving, earning, while slowly disappearing. That's not a life. That's a performance. And somewhere along the way, you learned to play your part so well that you forgot it was a role at all. You forgot the child who moved slowly, with wonder, the version of you that created without purpose, who rested without guilt, who felt joy without earning it, who didn't need to become anything in order to be enough. That version still lives inside you. And that's the deepest truth. You don't have to hustle your way back to wholeness. You only have to stop abandoning it. But because every time you choose yourself, gently, quietly, fully, you step out of the performance, you step back into your life. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So here's your invitation. Make your conditioning conscious, make your autopilot visible, make your pace optional, make your presence sacred again. You don't need to escape society. You just need to stop letting it define you. You are not a machine. You are not a brand. You are not your metrics. You are not your momentum. You are not the algorithm's favorite version of yourself. You are a soul, a breath, a flicker of light passing through time, here for something more than performance. And what if that more is found not in acceleration, but in surrender? What if the most radical thing you can do in this world isn't to optimize your day, but to reclaim your humanity, to feel again, to listen again, to slow down not because you're weak, but because you're wise? Because you've realized the shadow side of productivity is this: if you forget to be, you lose the very thing you were trying to build. And that's the final paradox. You were chasing freedom, but it never lived at the end of your to-do list. It lived in the moment you chose to stop running, to look your own exhaustion in the eye and whisper, you don't have to prove yourself anymore. Because the most revolutionary thing you can do in a world obsessed with output is to become fully, unshakably, unapologetically alive. So rest, not as escape, but as return. Soften, not as weakness, but as power. Choose presence, not as luxury, but as your natural state. Because in the end, no one will remember how many things you accomplished. They will remember how you made them feel, and more importantly, how you felt while you were here. And if you must measure something, let it be how deeply you lived, how fully you listened, how bravely you slowed down when the world begged you to keep going. That's not failure. That's freedom. If this message resonates with you, share it, comment below, and subscribe to Mind Hacks, because this is just the beginning of a different way to live. One that's not measured in speed, but in truth.